Good morning, everybody. I'm Santita Jackson, and this is the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you on this beautiful morning, and we've got a lot to talk about. We are in the midst of the election season, and I want you to point everybody to AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. We can stream live at am950radio.com, but if you want to meet my morning stars and join in on their conversation, please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Like and subscribe. Click the bell so that you can be notified whenever we go live, okay? And they have great conversations, and I'm going to be in on it tomorrow morning. Everybody, go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. That's it. And then Santita Jackson and Friends on Facebook. Santita Jackson and Friends on Facebook. But I really need you. Facebook reached out to me because of the traction that I've gotten. And they want everybody to go over to YouTube. So if you would, please go to YouTube, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, and like and subscribe, and please join us and join in on that conversation. And while you're at it, I've got the executive editor of In These Times magazine. This is a great magazine. They speak for the people. You should subscribe and support them. Ari Bloomcats is with us today. In These Times magazine, I never miss an issue, and you drop them over at Rainbow Push, and we love it. I always run by the magazine rack and grab them. And of course, Mark Fancher, National Conference of Black Lawyers, author, brilliant writer, brilliant thinker. And we're going to start things off with Pastor Vicki Johnson. Here in Chicago, she has not one but two churches. I have known her all of my life. Not only is she a great pastor, but she's one of the greatest singers I've ever heard, someone I grew up loving and admiring. Not just because she's a great singer, but because she's just a lovely lady who developed into a great woman of God. So glad to have you with us today. As we get into it, we're in election 2024. The outpouring that you had about yesterday's show was so tremendous that we said, let's follow up, because we're coming up on a momentous event in Michigan. Of course, they are going to have their Democratic presidential primary, and they have the option of voting uncommitted, or for President Biden, or for Marianne Williamson, or for Dean Phillips. And Bernie Sanders has said, don't vote uncommitted, vote for Biden. But many people are saying, unless he comes up with a ceasefire, 1,000 Black churches all around the country, more than 200 unions, so many people, so many groups are coming together, and they're saying, if you do not call for a ceasefire, not a temporary ceasefire, which they're calling for, that has to be practical, Ari, but a real ceasefire into this war now, 30,000 people dead. They said, if you don't end this now, if you don't stop funding this now, we are not going to support you in the fall. It's a red line. It's a non-negotiable. Is it that for you? I want you to let me know. Go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, join in on the conversation. And some people are saying, but Trump, others are saying, no, I don't think so. What do you say? The stakes are high, but they're high in a lot of places. So, Pastor Vicki Johnson, you know we love to start things off with the good news. And so we needed, number one, how can we worship with you on Sundays? Because we don't have to be in Chicago to worship with you. We can be
That's
here.
right. That's right. Well, you can worship with me at Lebanon Lutheran Church at 13100 South Manistee in Chicago at 9 o'clock a.m. and then at 11:30 a.m. at St. Thomas Lutheran Church on 80th and Jeffrey Boulevard. Both services can be viewed on Facebook.
I love it. And join her, because it's just she has a very practical approach to the gospel. And whatever your background, I think you're going to be blessed by it. Pastor Vicki Johnson, in these tumultuous times, what is the good news? Is there any?
Yes, there is. Good morning, Santita, and good morning to all of your morning stars and friends. There is good news. When we were children, we were always being taught to be independent. Our parents or guardians held our hands until we were able to walk alone. We drank from bottles until we could hold the cup with two hands for ourselves. They tied our shoelaces until we were old enough, and they taught us to tie them on our own. They fed us to ensure that we were properly nourished so that we could grow up to be healthy and strong. But once our sensory motor skills were developed and we mastered hand and eye coordination, we were left to feed ourselves alone. And how about that bike? We started out with a tricycle and then the two-wheeled bike with the training wheels. And do you remember them running alongside the bike after taking the training wheels off, and all of a sudden you were riding alone all by yourself independently? And of course, I remember learning to drive. When I got my driver's permit, my daddy was always in the seat right next to me, sharing old driver's wisdom, like don't swing out to turn. Or daddy would say, parked cars don't move. So when you are driving, don't drive so close to parked cars. Once the license was in hand, we were off on our own, independent. They did a great job of creating independent, productive people in society. They did not want us to need anything or anybody. Sometimes we are so dependent now that when we actually do need some type of assistance, we don't even know how to ask for it. We might even feel it is a sign of weakness when in actuality, it is a sign of strength. Galatians, the sixth chapter and the second verse says, bear one another's burdens.
Hmm.
We are here for each other. No one knows all and can be all. Here are 5 reasons to ask for help. Having help allows you to maintain your focus and energy. When you ask for support, you create the opportunity for others to share their gifts and their talents. When you ask for help, you allow others to feel happiness from being able to give. When you ask for help, you are trusting in others, which can strengthen your bond. And asking for help shows that you are imperfect, just like everyone else, which can increase the ability for others to relate to you. Getting help can free you to operate effectively and independently in your own area of expertise. So be willing to bear someone else's burden, but most importantly, be willing to let someone else bear your burden. It takes nothing away from you or your independence. As a matter of fact, it might even make you better if you will do this. And I believe that you will. Then to me, that's good news.
Hmm. I'm sending Ari a text right now. I think she's speaking to me. Yeah. We were just having this conversation before we came on air. Uh, since I have been, since I was let go from my Chicago station, uh, Ari has called me just about every day. What can I do? What can I do? What can I do? What can we do? What can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And I'm like, it's going to be okay. And let me just thank you, Pastor Johnson, you, Attorney Fancher, you, Ari, for being so supportive. Um, I can't thank you enough. And I really feel that that God has put all of you into my life at this time. And I thank you. I, I thank you for your support. And Ari, I accept it.
Hey, man.
I accept it. I accept it, Mark. I accept it, Pastor Johnson. I really do. And everyone, I hope that in your times of challenge, whatever they are, I mean, it's just life. Accept the support. Don't, as Patty LaBelle said, don't block the blessing. Don't
Mm.
do it. Don't do it. Just go on and be blessed. Go on and be blessed. And I love my little Ari. He reminds me so much of a very dear friend of mine who is now in glory, Mark Weiner. You have no idea. I can't wait for you to see my parents, and so they can hear your voice. You are so much like him, and I just thank you for that, and thank you, Pastor Johnson. Thank you. Love you so much.
Love
And
you.
again, how can we worship with you virtually or in person?
You can worship with us at Lebanon Lutheran Church, 13100 South Manistee in Chicago, Illinois, in the Hegwish community, or at St. Thomas Lutheran Church, 80th and Jeffrey Boulevard at 11:30 a.m. in the South Shore community. Both
And on
services,
Facebook, right?
yes, and on Facebook.
Absolutely, because people are looking for places to worship all over the country and all over the world, and I think that they could benefit from being with you. I love you, Pastor Johnson,
I love you.
and I feel that. Thank
Amen.
you so much. God bless you. You know, um, Something is happening in Michigan, Ari, and you have written about it. Should I say Layla? What is it? Elibed and Iman Abel Hadi. Has Biden completely lost Michigan? Voters are uncommitted. A new campaign in Michigan is urging voters to vote uncommitted. What what is going on as you see it in Michigan?
One of the things that I think is happening in Michigan that is really profound is that Michigan is expressing a feeling and an emotion and a movement that is actually widespread throughout the country right now. It is actually in um, pretty much every corner of the United States right now, which is a deep dissatisfaction of the way things are going, and especially the way things are going right now in Gaza. And a deep dissatisfaction, a deep, not only disappointment, but real anger at a administration that is not only, allowing this to happen on their watch, but an administration that we know has funded and has fueled the violence that's happening right now. And what is really profound and really in so many ways amazing about Michigan right now is the organizing that's happened behind this uncommitted campaign and all the community organizing that led to this moment and is leading to this primary right now, which is demanding that President Biden recognize his voters, recognize the people that he is asking to vote for him. And what these uncommitted organizers are saying in a lot of ways is that if you really want us, if you want to win in November, if you want us to go out to the polls, if you want us to take all of our friends to the polls, everybody that we know, if you want us to knock doors, if you want to do all of this, you need to understand the pain we're feeling in this moment. You need to understand the pain our families are in. You need to understand the pain our friends are in. You need to understand what a devastating genocide we are seeing right now is in Gaza. And until you acknowledge that, we really can't come to the table right now. And that's what we saw in this Q&A with Iman, it did with the campaign manager here of Uncommitted, which is saying, look, Biden, we're not saying Michigan's totally lost, but we're saying that at the very least, if you want to talk to us, you need to come and recognize how awful this situation is and demand a stop to it. And that's the type of moral clarity, honestly, that I feel like we all need right now. And I'm really, really grateful for the organizers in Michigan and folks who have been working on this uncommitted campaign, and also to the courage of all of the elected officials that
Mhm.
are behind this as well. And so really, really grateful for them for showing, the possibility of this moment and for expressing the feelings and outrage of so many in this moment too.
Well, it's surprising. It's 30 elected officials at least. And it does appear to be growing. We had Lavonia Perryman, who's a renowned radio and talk show host and producer in Detroit, and a nationally renowned political operative in the Democratic Party, but she's based in Detroit. And she said, look, this is a movement. It's not just a campaign, it's a movement, and it is spreading. Indeed, it is written in your magazine, more than 30 elected officials in Michigan have pledged to vote for uncommitted in the state's upcoming presidential primary, which is next week, February 27th. And they are calling for voters to join the campaign and do the same in what is a resounding rebuke of President Joe Biden's support for the Israeli assault on Gaza. The Vote Uncommitted campaign from the organization Listen to Michigan is also the latest sign that Biden is polling poorly in critical swing states like Michigan, and signals the steep climb the incumbent has made for himself and the Democratic Party in their effort to defeat Trump in November. Um, could this impact? Is there a worry, Ari, that this could filter down ticket?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of potentially filtering down ticket, turnout is always a question, right? Turnout to elections is always a question. And right now, the Biden administration is not giving voters a lot of reason to expand turnout. We're seeing, dips in youth engagement. We're seeing dips in other types of engagement in voter, appreciation for Biden right now as well. And I think in places like Wisconsin and places like Michigan, we're not talking about that many votes that Biden won by previously. And we're talking about votes that he absolutely needs to win. And you asked this other question about Michigan, and it's one thing I've been thinking about a little bit, and I'm not a historian of elections, and I'm curious if either you or Mark know differently here at all. But when was the last time a leading candidate, a leading Democratic candidate, had a state that he needed or they needed to win, had all of the reasons to win that state, had all of the numbers, had all of the polling that indicated they should absolutely win that state, and is somewhat throwing up their hands and saying, we're probably not going to win this one. We got to go. We got to put our energies elsewhere.
Can I give you a quick answer?
Yeah.
Every time a Democrat runs for president, okay, they snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. I mean, Mark, you've seen it happen. They take the most exciting candidates and they throw them under the bus. I remember the DLC is a byproduct of the Jesse Jackson campaign. No one has registered more voters in the history of the American Republic than Reverend Jesse Jackson. Nobody. And the first time he registered people, and this is when we were first voting, Mark. He registered at least 2.5 million people and brought them to the party. Their response was to develop the Democratic Leadership Council, which was the right wing of the party. And they said that if they were unsuccessful in overtaking the party, they were going to leave the party and become Republicans. And they did overtake the party. And the corporatization of the party has been so damaging. And it's killing the party. Almost killed it. Mark Fancher. What do you see?
Well, it's not surprising that this would happen in Michigan. Organizing, politics, all of that's very much a part of the culture of this state. With the auto industry having been here, the union movement having been so strong, the history here of Black nationalism and militancy. It was in Detroit that the Republic of New Africa was established. Malcolm X gave his Ballad or the Bullet speech here. Dr. King did a test run of his I Have a Dream speech here. There was revolutionary union movement for Black people here. And it's just not surprising. And then you add to that, in this situation, the heavy concentration of Arabs, Muslims in Dearborn. All of the ingredients are there. And it's a state where, unlike in many parts of the country, where people remain somewhat apathetic or disconnected from political life, it's very much a statewide pastime here to be very focused on the politics both locally and nationally. So this is not surprising that it would happen. But I think that there is also something different that's going on with this overall, and that is that the availability of the graphic images of what's happening in Gaza has moved people in a way that other violence perpetrated by presidents in the past, you know, it's very different. The Vietnam War came to an end largely because people were able to see graphic images every night on the news for the first time of the violence that was very much a part of any war. But unlike past wars, which had been romanticized, uh, the actual reality of war was something that was kept away from the public, and they were only told legends and myths and stories about the bravery and the courage and the righteousness of the American cause. Vietnam was very different, and people were able to see the human toll, to see the destruction and the violence, and it moved people. It got them out. I think that that's what we're seeing now with respect to Gaza. And certainly people who are Palestinian and who have family members and relatives living there, like Rashida Tlaib, are moved for obvious reasons. But then there are others. One of the other features of life in Michigan is a historical and ongoing friction or tension that exists between the Black community and the Arab communities here. This is an issue which has bridged that gap because people are able to see and relate to the suffering and the pain. And it has caused people to relate and understand and to sign on to this cause. So we're seeing something really rather phenomenal. And I think that hopefully I hope that it will inspire other people around the country to likewise take a very principled and moral stand and understand that this is bigger than just who wins the presidential election. This is really a test, a moral test for the country. And there is no excuse here. The fact is, and the truth is, that every president of the United States engages in unconscionable acts. As much as people loved Barack Obama, the fact is that this is a man who made cold, calculated decisions to stage drone attacks that killed lots of innocent people. But I think that here, while we could not see those drone attacks and we could not see the suffering, we can see the suffering, and the scope of it is so much broader. The impact is so much greater than these somewhat targeted attacks. And it really poses the question for every person who has conscience. Can I sign on to this?
Well, do you think this will go beyond November, Mark? I mean, do you think that Americans will begin to ask questions about what a president does? Because this is bipartisan, right? We talked about this yesterday, that it's not about protecting the democracy, it's about protecting the corporatocracy, right? And so the question then becomes, where will this energy go? Because I do feel, Ari, that I feel the energy, Mark, and in Chicago. And as I talk to people around the country, I feel something brewing here. I mean, Mark, do you see this going beyond the primary, going beyond November even?
Yes and no. I think that one thing that's true of the broad masses of people in this country is that they've been very well trained to think in terms of episodes.
Mhm.
We go home in the evenings and we watch television, and the most complicated problems and challenges and crises are resolved within the space of no more than 60 minutes. And we expect real life to be that way, that these very challenging problems and difficult things, they have to be resolved quickly and we move on. So many things that have been presented, not just this crisis, but so many other crises in recent years, are no longer crises in the minds of most people, even though they continue to take a heavy toll in many, many ways, because we just can't, we don't have a long attention span when it comes to dealing with serious problems in a protracted and consistent and systematic kind of a way. So, in that respect, I don't know that there will be a continuing movement, much less a revolution. But what I do think is that on some level, uh, the people begin to establish lines beyond which those in power cannot go. At the end of the Vietnam War, a line was drawn by people. A lot of the placards were not no longer carried. The protest marches did not continue. The sit-ins
Mhm.
and all of the demonstrations, all of those things against the war did not continue. But one thing was absolutely clear in the minds of everybody, that the United States was not going to be able to commit US troops to imperialist war ever again in exactly the same way that they had done it in Vietnam and in previous conflicts. And going forward, since that time, the use of U.S. troops in war has had to require some type of a lie or deception about the reason for committing these troops into combat. They had to go in to take out some terrorist who is posing an imminent threat to U.S. safety, or they're sending troops in to engage in humanitarian intervention, or they're doing this or that, when in truth, what they're going in to do is to stabilize conditions for the empire. And when they have not been able to do that, then they've had to use proxies. They've had to use Contras in Nicaragua to go and carry out dirty work that they, in the past, might have used U.S. troops to do. In Africa, they used U.S. Africa Command to, behind the scenes, direct the movements and the missions of African armies to carry out missions that really are beneficial to U.S. imperialism. In Southwest Africa, in Angola, they funded UNITA, which was a right-wing guerrilla army when people of Angola were fighting for liberation there. So they use proxy forces. And I contend that the Israeli Defense Force is a proxy force for U.S. imperialism. I think that the U.S. would love to go in and to send U.S. troops in to wipe Gaza clean, to make the way clear for the U.S. to occupy that territory. But they could never get away with that because the U.S. has drawn a line. I mean, the people of the U.S. have drawn a line. They would never stand for that. And they know it, and they won't even try that. And so I think that that's something else that's happening here, that even with respect to using proxies, whether is Israel or anybody else, to do U.S. dirty work, they're going to have to be more careful about that now. And I think that the public is going to be more vigilant about that, more tuned in, more conscious of how this happens, so that in that respect, yes, this is ongoing.
Well, Ari Bloomcast, before I bring in Dwight McKee, you've been nodding vigorously in assent. Where are the points of agreement here?
Well, I mean, there's so much, Mark, that you just laid out there that resonates so much, but also that I think some really profound insights in terms of how U.S. imperialism operates and on how resistance operates. One thing I'm curious about, Mark, you mentioned that the question about whether or not this continues the resistance sort of continues long term, and after November is like still, up in the air, which I very much agree with too. And something I've been thinking a lot about is, and I know that a lot of organizers right now in this moment are thinking ahead too, 9 months, 12 months. How does this sustain? Does it sustain? Like, what are the possibilities here? And this is something I'm a bit concerned about on a number of levels. One is that if Trump becomes president, I think we're going to see, a lot of these movements trying to wrestle with sort of fascism type aggressiveness at home, at the likes that we've never seen, as well as internationally expanded as well. And I'm honestly a bit worried for our movements, which are frankly exhausted right now. People are invigorated, and there is like a lot of energy, but I do think like there's also a question of how do these movements sustain, and do they sustain? And one thing that I've been talking with a bunch with other organizers and other journalists and publishers as well is what needs to happen in order for people to feel like they have the fuel and the necessary frameworks to carry themselves not through just Gaza right now, and we're going to be in it for quite a while, but also how do we develop the necessary frameworks that can apply to all sorts of things as we move forward. And we are seeing a huge amount of young people right now who are being activated by what's happening in Gaza, and whether or not the movements can sustain, I agree is an open question, but one part of that I think is how can we best equip the people who are being engaged and activated in this moment? How can we best equip them with the intellectual fuel, the intellectual ammunition that they need to fight back for not just past November, but for years and years to come? I mean, we all know this fight doesn't stop.
Mark, you, and then Dwight.
Yeah, I think a lot depends on the political orientation of the people and their mindset. If people continue to have the idea that marching and protesting, petitioning, doing all the things that they do, if they believe that the objective of all of that is to try and persuade those in power to change, then I think that they're going to be perpetually frustrated, perpetually upset, because that just is not going to happen. And I think that that's what burns out a lot of activists. We mobilized 30,000 people in Washington, and yet they continued to do the same thing. Well, of course they did. But if, on the other hand, people have come to terms with the fact that we have a fundamentally corrupt system that needs to be destroyed, lock, stock, and barrel, and that what we're trying to do is not necessarily get those who are the beneficiaries of that system, who manage the system, to change, but what we're trying to do is to continue to raise the mass level of consciousness to a point where people are aware of the contradictions and are prepared to do what's necessary to resolve those contradictions once and for all. Then there's less frustration, because everybody knows we're in it for the long haul, that this is something that does not require constant and repeated quote unquote victories, that we measure our success by just how aware people become, how conscious they become. And the evidence of that is usually there if you really look for it. And I think that that's where we need to reorient people. And I find that younger people are getting to that point much faster than previous generations. And that gives me some measure of hope.
Dwight McKee, founding member of Operation Push. You and Aline Walker were the two youngest members of the board, National Action Network. Your activism just continues and broadens. Indeed, you're one of the chief advisors to Cornel West, Dr. Cornel West, as he runs for president. And you're the dean of the Ma'afa Redemption Project here in Chicago that's doing so much to help our young people. What about sustaining these movements, Dwight?
Well, first it has to be principle-based and not issues-based. It has to be inherent in your character. It can't be a political position. It has to have a spiritual dimension to it. It's very hard to sustain an agnostic movement because the principles are not rooted in the fabric of the person. It's based on an agnostic movement, how issues affect them personally. Um, One of the great things that sustained the civil rights movement is that it was a movement that was rooted in a spiritual dimension. It was rooted in the church, and the people could draw on that spiritual energy and that divine energy to sustain them when everything on the social side looked like it was working against them. So you have to be able to sing in a strange land. You have to be able to sing hymns in the prison. You got to be able to hold hands and pray while they beat you in the head with billy clubs. That's beyond the natural, that's supernatural. And so I think that one of the things that you should consider is tying your constituency to something that's bigger than themselves. That involves, it's more humane than saving a tree. It has to be really rooted in a love for your neighbor as a love for yourself so that you have an empathy for anybody suffering. One of the great things about Dr. King is Dr. King was unrelenting in his commitment to fighting evil everywhere. And he said that until all of us are free, none of us are free, even the least of these. That's what made him so great. So my challenge is to in your quest to be able to sustain this over time, and I've been in it about 60 years, is that it really can't happen in the natural. You really need to have a spiritual dimension to this to sustain you during the hard times.
Otherwise, it won't work because it doesn't stop, Ari. It just doesn't stop. I mean, you go from because I think because the problems in humanity are just so they started with us, and the healing has to go down that deep. It just takes we're in a relay race, and everybody can get the baton if they choose to pick it up. So do you think Biden has lost Michigan? I mean, and this is one of these swing states upon which he is basing his presidential strategy to win. And this turning away from, and this contentious meeting that he had with the Arab American leadership, I can't imagine him having a meeting this tense with Jewish Americans and walking away and thinking about it. I can't imagine him doing that with Italian Americans. And I'm going to think about it. Now they're saying that the Biden administration will do a ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire where it's practical. Ari, this is like political suicide.
It is. I mean, we've seen the Democratic Party in, free fall and completely self-destructing over, the last while. And, the party seems to continuously be going out of its way to do things that are not in its best interest over and over again, or should I say rather that are not in voters' best interest over and over again right now. But I would like to just go back to something Dwight said a moment ago about a spiritual dimension as well, because there's I only want to speak for progressive Jewish communities right now and Jewish communities in general, but there is a just complete failure of our institutions right now to show up in really any meaningful way for the moment. We've got some institutions and some rabbis and synagogues out there who are trying to meet the moment and who have been trying to meet the moment for some time and sort of match spirituality with politics. I was managing editor for a while of a magazine called Tikkun, which we described ourselves as spiritual progressives and things like that. And that magazine is not terribly popular, or doing much as well. And for me, that speaks to a crisis in the Jewish communities right now, in which our institutions have completely failed on so many levels. And in many ways, those are both the synagogues, but also other Jewish institutions where we would see spiritual growth of sorts as well, and engaging in that stuff. And I don't know where folks are finding it right now, and a lot of us are trying to figure out how to create other spaces that are both engaging in both Judaism and engaging in types of anti-fascism and types of other progressivism. And we're really struggling right now to find those spaces and create those spaces. And so I just wanted to acknowledge Dwight's comments here about what can sustain us through right now. And I think that's something that a lot of folks, at least in Jewish communities right now, are really trying to figure out.
Well, it's not about institution, it's about constitution. It has to be in you. It's like the difference between an ambulance driver and a doctor. An ambulance driver, he will, that's his job. He will pick up somebody on the side of the road and drop them off at the hospital, and then go look for the next person that's on the side of the road to pick up to drop at the hospital, with no real, necessary commitment to their health, where a doctor is in his spirit. A doctor most doctors have grown up all of their lives wanting to be a doctor. And it starts off with seeing a bird on the side of the road, and they will pick the bird up and take the bird home and work on the bird till the bird can fly. And that spirit carries them all the way through their lives, that they just have a commitment to seeing people better, seeing people well, seeing people healthy. That you're a doctor, you're pretty much a doctor all the time. And so whether you are a pet doctor or a horse doctor, wherever you see an issue, you feel compelled to heal. And so ultimately, you're not going to have a lot of people that's built that way. Even Jesus said that it's that there's the calling is the chosen a few. There's very few people that's going to really ultimately be committed over time to these kinds of things. And so I think what you should do is create your allies, try to find like-minded people, try to find people whose values reflect your values, and bond with them, because ultimately it's going to be that small crowd that's going to carry the load, carry the fight. Go ahead, Santita. I'm sorry.
No, because I was going to ask you. I mean, I think you face the same crisis in the Black church as Dr. King was, as his ministry was being constituted, shall I say? I'm sorry, whoever was. I mean, you have the Progressive Baptist Convention, because Dr. King was thrown out of his convention already. I mean, Dwight.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and so he was with the outliers. The outliers being, one of them was Reverend C.L. Franklin, Aretha Franklin's father. Yeah.
Dr. King was throwing out some churches at gunpoint.
Yeah.
Where the preacher came and brought a gun and say, "You get out of here." And that's why I said that a mass movement is really a misnomer. It really comes down. It's always going to come down to two or three people who are really called to do this thing.
Dwight, you said it's a misnomer.
Yeah.
I think that this crisis really has the potential to be to cause a spiritual fire in the Jewish community, because if they really begin to look at it seriously, what they will find is that the whole concept of Zionism was a cynical creation by people who had no spiritual concerns whatsoever. What they were doing was opportunistically using and exploiting the purity of the Jewish faith for political and earthly objectives. And now it has progressed to the point where they're committing mass murder in God's name.
Mm.
And for people who are sincere in their religious convictions, this has to be so offensive on the most basic level that it's no longer even a political question. You know, this goes to the very heart of who human beings are, and their most cherished values, their most basic sense of morality, and their relationship with the creator of the universe, that anybody would dare in their name to carry out these horrific acts.
Mhm.
And when people consider it on that level, I think that they're much more inclined to move and to stay in motion until they have vanquished this threat to something that's so vital to their eternal life.
Yeah. I mean, I think that tracks a lot, and we are seeing anti-Zionism, becoming increasingly popular, and that the space for liberal Zionism, is increasingly shrinking. In this moment in particular, it's increasingly very difficult for people to, hold space as liberal Zionists in this moment. One of the things that I've been hoping for as well is that in addition to moving towards anti-Zionism, that people are also able to see the multiple sort of hydras of Zionism and what it represents. So there's Zionism as it is in terms of land and all of that, but there's also the very tight relationship between Zionism and white supremacy, and Zionism and imperialism, and Zionism and statehood and nation and nationalism as well, and patriotism as well. And so what I'm hoping is that and essentially fascism. And so what I'm hoping happens is not just this move towards anti-Zionism, but that the move towards anti-Zionism can build a broader framework that can really lead people to understand the ways that we talk about immigration in this country, the ways that we talk about education in this country, the ways that we talk about, really everything in this country under the larger frameworks of, fascism, white supremacy, militarism, as well. And so, I'm a little, just a little have some anxiety that we've got all these new people rushing into, Jewish Voice for Peace and now and other organizations. We're anti-Zionist, we get it. And that can't be the stop. That where the learning and the frameworking stops. In one sense, the anti-Zionism is almost the easy part. It's very it's pretty hard to justify this at this point. But really, it's that sort of next step of what does it mean for white supremacy, and how would we think about that here domestically as well.
Well, it really
Wearing something similar in the Black church, Dwight. I mean, really?
Well, it really comes down to it really not a Zionist fascist issue. It's a depravity of man issue. It's there's good and there's evil. There are people who are selfish and vain and self-centered who would do anything to legitimize themselves at the expense of everybody else. And there are other people who are empathetic to their brother, and they love their neighbors like they love themselves and willing to share and to care. And so whatever label you put on it, it really comes down to the heart of the man, who the man is and what you're dealing with. Most other things, the philosophies, the politics, is just a pretext for them to operate their own self-interest. And that's why I said that it really has to do with men of principle who, as both the biblical tradition, the Christian tradition, and the Jewish tradition, and in many ways the Arab tradition, comes down to whether or not you're going to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And Jesus said it, that everything in Christianity really comes down to that. You love Jesus. I mean, you love your neighbor as you love yourself. And he had gotten it from the other rabbis and the historic rabbis and the prophets, who basically came down and said the same thing, is that let justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. But it really is principle based and it's character based, and it's who you are and how you deal with yourself and your neighbor.
Stay right there, everybody. We're having a tremendous conversation that really is about more than being uncommitted in Michigan. Sorry, Boom Katz, executive editor of In These Times magazine, and attorney Mark Fancher. I know you're going to have to go, but I would love to get a closing thought from you. But I got about 30 seconds right here. Mark, you have anything you got to say before you got to go and finish lawyering?
No, just that I think that we, no matter how frustrating or intimidating the future may look, we have to look back and be inspired by all that has happened just within the past few months. I know personally that if you'd asked me 5 or 6 years ago to envision the level of comprehension of the contradictions of Zionism that we now see, I would not have been able to do it.
10 seconds.
This has exceeded my wildest dreams in terms of people understanding it, and we can only be inspired to move ahead.
Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio. Stay tuned for the second hour.
See you, Mark.